And we're live! Hey everyone! It's been a hot minute since I did the stream. I haven't been absent. I've just been, playing without streaming. So yeah, I did a little mining off camera. I should probably show you the outside. Yeah, it's all there. Of course, there's extra mega torches and everything to keep it all completely safe. Where was it? It was here. So, yeah, just for doing some fun stuff. Oh, I gotta get speech chat open. Can't make that mistake too many times, or I'll lose my 4 viewers. So yeah, I'm back on Vars's Minecraft server, just vibing, building. I do currently have the most ambitious project on the server, which I'm happy about. Solmar absolutely deserves it. Oh, shoot. That was a block higher. In that respect, Solmar is now revived. We are up to 5 active players. Which is 1 more than we had back in the day, so, Uh, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. So plans are to raise this up to touch that. That'll be the lip. We'll need to work on sectioning out the floors, because we're gonna have 5 sections, 1 for each corner, and then the center. Replace that with lava crystals. Add a big sphere of some kind. I'm not entirely sure what I want. It might be like a statue instead. I'll have more specifics later. But yeah, that'll knock out the interior, which I'll be pretty happy about. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. I'm only currently working on about half the wall, so I am do have a lot of that ahead of me. And I am yet again running low on blocks because, shocker, this thing's fucking gigantic. Actually, let me show the stats on that. How many of these things have I? So I've mined 102,000 sandstone. And I've placed 70,000. I am curious why that number is so different. Because I definitely don't have 30,000 on me, I only have about 10,000. But that can be addressed another time. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. What the fuck is that? I sterilized this whole fricking thing. I actually forgot. This is not necessary anymore. Okay, apparently I'm gonna have to go around and place more surrounding it, or maybe just clear the land around the temple, put a moat in. Because I've only sterilized the temple grounds, so things spawn outside of it just fine. And Endermen really like to place blocks in my zone whenever they get the opportunity. So there's that. And yes, I am wasting blocks on those internal corners, but it's satisfying to me to know that it's not just a hollow building. It is technically still a hollow building, but shush. Oh yeah, and someone also went around mining like random ores. I don't even know what they were going for. Probably like iron, because I don't see a lot of iron on the floors. I think that's coal. But, like, come on. Really? I went out of my way to make this a pristine, perfectly smooth floor. And obviously the Endermen love messing that up. But my teammates... Anyway, this is How to Cook Delicious Lore about Delicious in Dungeon by Mother's Basement, which I'll be listening to until such a time as there is someone in my chat for me to worry about.
Fantasy's most alluring quality is how it transports us to new places and makes us believe the unbelievable. We love getting lost in worlds entirely unlike our own, yet the paradox of truly fantastic world building is it often hinges on the most
Oh yeah, I left that blank to denote the
Can
corner.
you make paper from parasitic plant monsters? How would life evolve in a world beset by cyclical hurricanes? Which type of monster person f***s the best? Perhaps the most essential of these questions,
Succubus,
lodged
obviously,
long
they
ago
have magic
in my brain
powers.
by one of history's great video essays, is what do they eat? Throughout time, across the earth, man has always been driven by the search for his next meal. And there's no reason to assume that would change on some other earth, aboard an airship, or in the depths of an ancient dungeon. Though, of course, the logistics of answering it do get a lot trickier the further one flies from plane to pasture. Shit, dudes on regular, real ships died by the boatload because they forgot to say oranges. And they had boats to carry their loads of food in. On a months-long foray into a maze full of monsters where every pound of preserved provisions in your pack further encumbers you in battle, at a certain point, you may as well just start eating the monsters. But that raises a whole new avenue of world-building inquiry. What do you think a giant half-snake, half-chicken tastes like? Delicious in Dungeon, adapted by the inimitable studio Trigger from Ryoko Kui's manga of the same name, preoccupies itself with answering that exact question, plus many others like it, and in so doing cooks up one of the richest, juiciest, most tantalizingly textured traditional fantasy settings I have ever had the pleasure of exploring. A place brimming with old magic, intermingling cultures, and authentically organic life that paints a picture of a much broader world from the vantage point of one lone island. A world which you and I are about to explore some more in just a sec, after this word from today's sponsor. Naraka Blade Point is a thrilling melee and movement-focused battle royale where 60 players duke it out for dominance with their choice of 17 playable heroes. Skill super the mech bear bit of strike effects and key ingredients are needed to cook up. If you want to get grappling hooked on Naraka's uniquely addictive gameplay, click the link below to download the game today. 2 key ingredients are needed to cook up a
Oh my god, I was literally a couple seconds.
What do monsters taste like? The most obvious being a keen grasp of cooking, which Ryoko Kui obviously has in spades. You need only look at the many delicious drawings spread throughout the manga and anime, plus the highly detailed step-by-step recipes that accompany them, to see that for yourself. And need further evidence, look no further than YouTube and TikTok, where people are cooking those recipes in real life, obviously substituting real ingredients for the made-up ones, which they can do because, of course, they're based on real recipes from around the real world. Even the grilled treasure bugs and centipede skewers are based on dishes from Japan, China, and Thailand. The fact that Marcel is the least hesitant to eat those out of all the monsters is the biggest giveaway that the series didn't come from a Western fantasy writer, which honestly you won't find many of watching or reading this series, because Kui-sensei is so clearly well-read, not just on the traditional tropes of Western fantasy and RPGs, but the traditional folklore that underpins so much of it. The bestiary here is every bit as rich, diverse, and well-researched as that of The Witcher. But of course, you're never going to know what made-up monsters taste like, or what to sub them for in real recipes, no matter how many old folk tales you read about. For that, you need the other key ingredient in D&D's world-building stew, biology. The series imagines its delicious dungeon as a thriving, varied ecosystem, inventing naturalistic explanations for how creatures straight out of a D&D monster manual could not just plausibly exist, but coexist. Mimics, for example, are reimagined as massive hermit crabs that hide inside chests and cabinets, rather than seashells or the 69 different kinds of collectible trash in another crab's treasure, snipping and stabbing anyone who approaches them with insufficient caution. A deadly predator for any adventurer, but also natural prey for the aforementioned treasure bugs, which simultaneously reproduce and set themselves up to trick unwitting treasure hunters by laying their eggs inside of living mimics and eating them from the inside out. The law of the dungeon is the law of the jungle. Eat or be eaten. And every creature adheres to that law as it carves out its own niche in the ecosystem. So carnivorous flora's gotta be extra aggressive and adopt a variety of clever strategies to compete with and prey on all the hyper-aggressive fauna around it. And when you see a kraken, of course, like any squid, it's gonna have kraken-sized parasites big enough to have their own parasites. Also, its sperm is to scale, and Laios no like you, which is unusual for him since monsters and monster ecology are his special interest. By the way, big-time pro tip for any prospective world builders out there: put a guy in your story who's as into magic or monsters or history or spaceships or whatever as this guy's into trains, and the naturalistic exposition writes itself. Speaking of Laios's predilection for monsters, though, that in itself is a great aspect of the series' world building, because just like in real life, he's not alone in it. There are a lot of guys like him all over his world with different areas of monster obsession and expertise. Mushroom hunters run all over our world collecting and cataloging interesting fungi. So in another world where the mushrooms are fun little guys who go around and stuff, one can only imagine how much more excited those kinds of guys would get about them. Likewise, bug collecting's a common hobby in real life, where rare and exceptional specimens can sell for tens of thousands of real dollars. So if there were insects that looked like literal jewelry, it's easy to see those sorts spending an equally pretty penny to acquire them. Nerd culture has been an enduring facet of human culture since Thrasydus of the Deme of Exone carefully cataloged the comings and goings of every ship at the port of Piraeus, and acknowledging that makes the series' human and demi-human cultures feel that much more real. Realer still is the way that Laios feels positively inadequate in his passion for dragons specifically, compared to the real die-hard dragon fans who can tell you the age, species, gender, and habitat of a specimen from a single tongue click. Like, that's me right there, talking tokusatsu history with all my old Taku friends who can identify a Godzilla movie from the condition and model of the suit. I'm such a fraud. What am I even doing in Japan? Speaking of dragons, though, popular as they are, this is far from the first work of fiction to invent a biological explanation for fire breathing in particular, but I especially love the elegance of Delicious in Dungeon solution, where dragons store non-digestible biomass from the food they eat to convert into fuel later and ignite it by clicking their tongues. We've come a long way from the dragons they ride on Pern eating special rocks just to turn their stomach acid into pyrophoric gas, though we've also come a long way from the initial question we set out to answer, now haven't we? Luckily, if you're still wondering what a basilisk or cockatrice taste like, that's one of the easiest questions to plug into this biological framework. The chicken part would obviously taste like chicken, while the snake part would taste like snake, which tastes like chicken. So, yeah, they taste like chicken. But, while your curiosity's got you here, the manga also asks and answers some other fascinating questions about these chimeric critters, such as how they taste other things with both mouths, and where those things go once they're digested, out the chicken butt, which both stomachs connect to in a Y shape. Though, interestingly, the snake's reproductive tract and nervous system appear to be dominant, as evidenced by their snake-like eggs and the fact that the snake part lives a little longer when you cut them in half. Which, yeah, that's basically exactly how they did science back in those days. Great world building all around. And considerations like those are consistent throughout the series, informing how each new monster behaves in subtle and fascinating ways. For instance, because hippogriffs have half the digestive tract of a horse, they're natural omnivores and thus less aggressive hunters than their all-carnivore cousin, the griffin, which is one of the chief clues that Laios uses to suss out that the monster got changeling. But on that note, the series is at its absolute best when it's able to tie those biological facts into the very fabric of the original folklore. Changeling myths have long been attributed to fairies in Western European culture. Typically, they'll spirit a child away for a variety of purposes, to adopt in some of the nicer stories or as tithes to the devil in less nice ones, leaving one of their own behind as an imperfect replacement. These myths don't involve fairy rings, a real-world phenomena where mushrooms grow in bark and circle patterns, often withering other plant life within their radius, but there are a lot of superstitions involving people getting cursed or disappeared when they step into those, so it's not hard to see how Ryoko Kui would have drawn that connection. She also blends in elements of Scandinavian folklore, though, where changelings are connected to trolls instead of fairies. Those subterranean creatures don't have any particular use for the human child, it's said, but rather want their own troll children to be raised by humans to give them better lives. One thing these Scandinavian myths do have in common with their European counterparts, though, are the harsh, often deadly methods used to expose and drive out suspected changelings, which range from beating them to tossing them in ovens. Superstition that's put at least one real-world mother in jail, but Kui-sensei combines that idea with a different real-world horror story to complete her concept of changeling mushrooms, namely cordyceps and other fungal parasites, which reproduce and spread by manipulating and ultimately killing their mostly insect hosts. In this case, changelings driven out of their social groups are left to starve in the wilderness or possibly just killed in an oven, and the corpses then spread their spores to start the cycle anew. It's a very clever and creative twist on the real fungal reproductive strategy, manipulating the social behavior of larger animals instead of trying to directly control nervous systems exponentially more complex than anything cordyceps preys on in nature, like, say, the zombies in The Last of Us. It's not necessarily a more realistic take on the concept than that, but it does feel far more magical. And in a world where magical is the baseline for reality, that somehow makes it easier to swallow. It helps quite a bit that the manga and anime almost never invoke magic unless they absolutely have to, even in cases where other fantasy stories happily take that shortcut. Animated armor has long been a staple of D&D and its many derivatives, and it's moved by magic in every single one. Characters in the Danmeshi universe assume that's how it works there, too, but it turns out to be a colony of mollusks with iron-like shells that connect to mimic the musculature of man, which is just genius on so many levels. And even where magic is needed, there's always some kind of logic backing it up, like the spores causing that transformation. Shapeshifters are illusions given physical dimension with magically moving leaves by skulking nine-tailed tanuki off in the shadows. The enchanting power of a mermaid's song can be disrupted by anything that distorts or overpowers the sound waves carrying it. A typo or poor handwriting in the magical code animating a golem can have disastrous consequences, as can putting its core in a substance it wasn't built for. Succubi drain a person's life force by, well, I'll leave you to discover that yourself in Season 2. It's fun. The same goes for any magic used by people, which needs to be controlled by incantation and channeled with intent through a physical medium. Generally, though, whenever someone in the series breaks that rule, it's a sure sign there's something very wrong going on. And all magic becomes more potent the deeper one goes into a dungeon, because the mana in the air is thicker down there, which includes the mana that lets bigger and more complex monsters defy conventional rules of physics and macrobiology, which explains why weaker, smaller, less clever monsters tend to be found on the higher floors, while bigger beasts and more devious magic users lurk down below. Basic RPG game balance is built into the world building, and it correlates with the balance of the magical ecosystem. Slimes appear in every dungeon in this world, not just thanks to the enduring influence of wizardry and Dragon Quest in Japanese popular culture, but because their ability to break down organic matter into mana stabilizes the dungeon's magic supply, providing an essential mechanism for it to grow organically by absorbing more organic matter from the outside. And those slimes also factor into the anime's cooking system, since, as you'd expect, naturally occurring gelatin is a pretty darn versatile ingredient. With slimes as its digestive agents and cleaners serving self-repair functions, the dungeon almost starts to look like a giant, living, magical organism unto itself. And that naturally raises the question, what does it eat? Which the anime then just kind of leaves ominously hanging in the dank, dusty air to gnaw at the back of our minds as the party gets on with their adventuring. It's a little more subtle about it than, say, Made in Abyss, but rest assured, there is plenty of nightmare fuel to go around down in this deadly hole in the ground, too. The bigger difference, though, is that the more delicious dungeon is as full of history as it is horrors. Instead of crumbling away as unnatural nature retakes it, like the Abyss, evidence of the civilizations that once stood where the dungeon now yawns have been preserved in almost their original state down there. Treasure bugs and living armor mimic the winged lion motif of the Golden Country's heraldry, which we can also see adorning wall fixtures and statues from the second floor down, long before those details are explained in the hidden village. The first floor is more of a generic tunnel maze type dungeon, but that's only because the architecture has been repurposed from the island village's crypt, which wasn't originally part of the castle town. And below the castle, connected to its sewers on the 5th floor, we find an ancient dwarven cistern, at the heart of which lies a long abandoned fortress from the old war between dwarves, gnomes, and elves, likely absorbed into the dungeon long before the Mad Mage ever rose to power, which subtly implies the Golden Country's vast wealth might have originated from the same sort of dungeoneering profiteering our heroes heroes now engage in. All these layers of the past are stacked up on each other like a cake, baked into the dungeon's visual design for observant viewers and readers to pick up on as the heroes meet and eat each monster of the week. But they're also occasionally laid bare in the plot before they actually get laid bare in the exposition chapter, especially when those heroes deal with magic instead of monsters. The illusions of the living paintings, for instance, clearly reflect the Mad Mage's dearest and most accursed memories, doubling as traps for intruders and ways for him to cling to what little's left of his sanity, which is what Laios finds him doing when he goes in there looking for food. Though I really hope Doodle Laios never had to run into him. Poor little guy. Haven't felt that sorry for a f***ed up drawing since Paper Jam Dipper. Actually, pretty much whenever illusion magic comes into play, it tends to reveal interesting aspects of both the characters and the world. Like how the shapes the aforementioned shifters take reflect both the personalities of the specific characters that conjured them, as well as more general biases about other races that were baked into their cultural upbringings. Clever way of revealing what race relations are like outside the dungeon without ever actually having to leave it. And a great, rare example of one of my personal favorite flavors of immersive fiction, microcosmic world building. The standard approach to building a fantasy world is to just, well, build the whole damn thing and put it on display for the audience to enjoy, sending the characters on a cross-country, cross-continent, or even cross-cosmos odyssey that conveniently takes them by and through every nook and cranny the author has so carefully crammed cultural and historical details into. Lord of the Rings, One Piece, Freerun, Stormlight Archive, The Expanse, Star Wars, there are many such cases. But say you're building a world for something like a video game, where it's just not feasible to keep making new locations forever. Or maybe budget's not the issue, but it just doesn't make sense in the context of your story for your characters to leave where they're at. Like if their noble house has been assigned to watch over production of the spice melange essential to all space travel, and then they're betrayed and have to wage a guerrilla war to wrest control of the planet back, in the process effectively taking over the entire universe by leveraging that one vital resource. You can still tell us a great deal about the greater universe through the characters who've lived and adventured out there, the culture they've brought back with them, the economy and politics they're mixed up in, and rumors of places they've never been, without having to actually go there. Then maybe they can go to some of those places in future books, and then much later, after you're dead, your talentless fail son can keep milking your notes on those other places and historical events that happened there forever without ever creating anything of his own. Just for example. What I'm trying to say is, if your plot needs to stay put, you can always bring the world to your characters by painting a smaller, detailed picture that lets your audience grasp the essence of the big one. Like how Harry Seldon developed his psycho-historical model of the entire galactic empire and Foundation by observing all the different cultures on its city-planet capital of Trantor. Or how Harriet Dubois cobbles together a workable enough understanding of Elysian politics, history, and metaphysical geography, stumbling around the crumbling former capital of the world, Revachol. But your setting needn't be something so grand as a capital, and your protag needn't be named Harry either. Any sizable hub of culture or trade can serve as a microcosm of the wider world that spins around it. And while this sort of thing's a bit more common in sci-fi, dungeons, with their promise of fame and fortune for those brave or stupid enough to plumb their depths, are a particularly strong narrative tool for bringing people from all over and all walks of life together. Once a small, poor village of fishing folk and olive farmers, the island above the dungeon, particularly its lord, has grown fat and rich in the last few years off the wealth dredged up from the Golden Country. And that's attracted plenty of adventurers, academics, middlemen, and straight-up criminals looking for their their own cut of the pie. Elves and dwarves, gnomes and halflings, kobolds and catgirls, poor orphans from out west, and mighty warrior princes of the east, each carrying their own distinctive piece of the puzzle that is the wider world. For instance, the island lord's hostility toward dwarves ostensibly stems from blaming all of them for the actions of a few criminals a few years ago, but I think that really just confirmed in him a deeper, more culturally rooted bigotry that blames dwarves for creating the dungeons they're so good at digging up. In contrast, his mewling deference to the elves, even as he and the gnomish scholar Tansu are plotting to use the dungeon's immortality curse to raise themselves to their level, reflects how elves have put themselves above the other races using the wisdom gained from their longevity and monopolization of ancient dark magic secrets. On that note, it's also telling that the gnomish magic system is the one most commonly used in schools and by adventurers. Gnomes are more willing to share their arcane traditions with other races, which is in keeping with their culture's view of magic as cooperation with spirits as opposed to elvish magic, which controls them. Though it may not be entirely altruistic. Gnomes might be fostering cooperation with other races to gain a leg up on the elves. Mr. Tansu does show quite a bit of personal animosity toward elves and a tendency to use other people to his own advantage without asking, even if he does try to return the favor after the fact. I really appreciate how Dungeon Meshi doesn't actually have to tell us how the old wars between the long-lived races ended. We simply see it through their present-day stances and standing in the world. Though it does subtly guide the audience towards some of the finer points of its big picture by occasionally shifting our perspective from Laios to Kabru, who has a special interest in people rather than monsters. Where Laios and Senshi look at dungeons through an ecological lens, Kabru wants to understand them as a sociological phenomenon, to solve the many societal problems that spring up from them when they boom and bust. His perspective greatly aids our understanding of how the adventuring society around the dungeon is structured, but even within the dungeon, we can apply that same lens to learn more about the world. Since culture is an essential component of good character writing, and Dungeon Meshi's character writing is very good, the party is naturally well suited to serve as a microcosm within this microcosm. Unusually well suited, in fact, thanks to Marcel, who's one of the few elven adventurers on the island. Admittedly, she is an outlier among the elves, with her deep personal interest in the lives of humans and other races, her desire to share the secrets and benefits of ancient magic with the world, and her general sense of humility. But exceptions help us understand rules, and her interactions with other elves, like the Mad Mage Thistle and the Canaries, tell us a great deal about the structure of their isolated society. Chilchuck's cynical attitude and strict code of honor are both reflections of the mistreatment and exploitation faced by half-foots on the island before he founded his guild. A safeguard that Mikbel, the younger half-foot in Kabru's party, doesn't seem to fully appreciate, as he just sees the Union taking money out of his pocket and holding him back from exploiting his kobold companion, Kuro. Interesting bit of commentary there on how younger generations tend to take the gains won for them by unions for granted. Half-foots generally seem to be the least trusting of other races, justifiably so, as we see in one of the bonus comics, which are flush with great jokes and world-building nuggets if you haven't read them, where it's revealed that half-foots are used as early mermaid warning systems on certain ships from certain countries. And as a reflection of that, in another one of those comics, we learn trolls aren't actually real, but rather myths stemming from old, scary bedtime stories that half-foots used to tell their kids about tall men, or trolls in their language. In another of those delightful bonus comics, we learn that dwarves get gassy when there's too much mana in their system, which might explain the superstitions that make Senshi as skittish about magic as Marcel is about monster meat when the story begins, though that may also be rooted in the dwarves' long-standing conflict with elves. Meanwhile, his passion for ecology and respecting the balance of nature seems to be something he inherited from the orcs, who effectively raised him after his dwarven guardians died. As a quick side note, I love this series' take on orcs as victims of colonization whose violent reputation is used as a post hoc justification by the elves and men who drove them from their land and into lives of pillage and plunder in the first place. Speaking of demi-humans, Izutsumi is kinda late to the party, but she provides some interesting insights into how Eastern Island cultures treat demi-humans, like pets, if they're lucky. With the hag curse, she comes to Marcel to get cured, serving as something like a magic shock collar. The curse they can't cure, meanwhile, prompts Dungeon Meshi to start exploring the shape and nature of the human soul, though we won't get into the meat or yolk of that topic until season 2. Laios doesn't pick up on a lot of this, of course, because he's more interested in monsters than people, but that too is a reflection of his experience in Tall Man society. In his nightmares, we see a lot of people have mocked and taken advantage of his naive, tactless nature in the past, not to mention mistreated his sister for no good reason, so it makes sense that he'd be drawn to the more straightforward eat or be eaten logic of monsters. Just as a lot of real people on the spectrum prefer the company of real animals. He particularly struggles dealing with Shuro, who comes from a more collectivist Confucianist culture where unspoken customs abound and reading the atmosphere is socially expected, mistaking his efforts to be polite for genuine friendliness. Something that, again, reflects how, in the real world, such societies can be difficult for the aneurotypical to navigate, even if, in some cases, they're also more accommodating than European individualism. Interestingly, Shuro's culture is just about the only human thing we ever see Laios take more than a cursory interest in, as evidenced by his choice to name his sword Kensuke, which might make him the fantasy equivalent of a weeb. Through these sorts of details, we can extrapolate more about Eastern and Western tall man cultures than we see on the page or screen based on what we know about their real-world equivalents, in the same way that prior knowledge of Tolkien-esque fantasy and RPG tropes can help to connect other implied details about the setting. And by looking at the clothing and naming conventions of characters from other races and continents, we can further infer and fill in even more specific details about the world and its people than the manga and anime have time for. Of course, we can't say anything for certain about any aspect of the world building that's not covered in the original text or the official Adventurer's Bible World Guide, but then, even within the text, there's an ever-present possibility that things we learn secondhand might be distorted truths or straight-up lies, like how trolls are just tall men, or Laios' favorite book, the Dungeon Gourmet Guide, is actually just a kid's book written by a guy who's never eaten a cockatrice in his life. Though there is still some educational value in there with its biological trivia about monsters. The unreliable nature of this info doesn't really harm the world building, though, at least not for me. Rather, it helps me further immerse myself in the medieval pre to early Renaissance viewpoint of the setting by taking me back to a time when most people never traveled beyond their own neck of the woods, and the only things they really knew for sure about the world were what little they could verify with their own eyes. That's the true value of world building in microcosm, at least when it comes to fantasy. In sci-fi, it more helps to sell the idea that space is vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big, though I guess that's kind of the same thing when you think about it, just relative to spaceships and light-speed communication rather than horse and carriages and pigeon mail? Well, actually, Delicious in Dungeons World already has high-speed, long-distance communication via magic, plus teleportation for travelers who don't mind the slight possibility of arriving in the middle of a wall or another person, which goes some way to explaining how Dungeon Meshi's society has a more developed global nerd culture than we did back on medieval Earth. Without that, I'm sure they'd still have local mandrake growing competitions, but not internationally recognized ones. Of course, the downside of smaller scale fantasy is it doesn't really leave much room for all the fascinating implications of having those communication capabilities in that time period. But if you want to see that explored in more depth, you can always go read Discworld for its Clax network or play the Trails games for their Orbital tech. Dungeon Meshi happily fills its own particular ecological niche within the greater fantasy landscape, and that's exactly what makes exploring its world alongside its characters feel so special. It fixates on the same things they fixate on from their same perspective, because those characters are what really matters to its story, and by making the world immediately around them feel so deliciously real, it's able to bring Laios, his friends, and all the adventurers they cross paths with to more vivid and convincing life. That's the third secret ingredient in its world building stew. Dungeon Meshi knows a meal is only as good as the people you share it with. And I'm very glad I got to share this one, not just with these lovable weirdos, but all of you as well. I look forward to reading your comments on your favorite aspects of Dungeon Meshi's world down below, and while you're leaving them, if there's some other anime or movie or video game or comic or book world you'd like to see me explore in this style, please tell me about that too. I'm Jeff Fu, Imaginary
Read my
Travel
book.
Blogger, thanking you for joining me on this journey.
Oh, he's a whole.
Tell a lot about.
He's a whole series on the art of world building. Odd that this is in the art of world building playlist, but it's not titled with it, because like the first two were. Then it's the wacky world building. There's the wonderful world building, and everything else just completely ditches the naming scheme. Anyway.
You can tell a lot about a fantasy world by looking at its map. Mostly what places exist and where they are relative to other places, but also how the creator plans to explore them. If a story presents you with a map of a whole continent or globe, you can expect to see its characters embark on long journeys full of wildly varied sights and sounds as they get embroiled in large-scale, world-shaking events. A more detailed map of a smaller region, like, say, the trade route between Pazlo and Yoitsu that Holo and Lawrence follow in Spice and Wolf, implies a tighter focus, plots driven by organizational and interpersonal conflicts rather than geopolitical ones, locations painted with fine enough brushwork to give each town and city a distinct identity from its neighbors, in contrast to the broader strokes cultural differences that separate nations and stories on a continental or global scale. As a general rule of thumb, the smaller a fantasy map is relative to the length of the story to which it's attached, the more you can expect to learn about whatever happens to be on it. Knowing that, the map included with each part of Ascendance of a Bookworm's 700-plus page first volume, which depicts one district of one city and its most immediate surroundings, plus the full contents of a single apartment, is kind of intimidating. To tell a fantasy story of that scope on that scale requires obsessive attention to detail. The construction of your world must be immaculate right down to the embellishments and joinery, because you're asking your audience to examine it under a microscope, essentially. Bookworm's world has history, religion, and economy, unique flora and fauna, and a complex social order built around an equally complex magic system, all of which we see from the perspective of ordinary citizens whose daily lives and mindsets are shaped directly by it. It's an intimate, uncompromisingly realistic take on world building that makes for thoroughly immersive viewing and even more immersive reading, which you can experience for yourself through today's sponsor, Bookwalker, but more of that later. It is, of course, only to be expected that a light novel or manga will build its world with greater depth and breadth than a rigidly paced, budget-limited anime adaptation ever could, but if you're interested in the art of world building, and if you're not, I don't know why you clicked on this video, then I can't recommend the Bookworm light novels in particular highly enough. Worldviews and cultural attitudes are as important here as hard facts and lore, and even with adept visual storytelling, there's only so much plot process that can be conveyed without narration. Which is not to say that the anime is a slouch in that department. Even under the limits of its medium and production, it has managed to give me a greater understanding of what life in its world is really like and how people there think than fantasy series several times its length. In his landmark philosophical treatise, The Shandification of Fallout, link in the doobly-doo, the great thinker Bobby the Tongue laid out a key question for gauging the fidelity of fictional worlds at a glance. What do they eat? Any world builder concerned with verisimilitude, Mr. B. Tongue argues, will seek to establish how the people and civilizations in their world sustain themselves, what and where they farm and or forage. It's rarely plot-relevant info, but it goes a long way to making a world feel real. This is the third question that Bookworm poses and answers for its audience, right after, are there any books in this house, and what can mine do about her hair getting in her face? Her mom takes her to a market in the town center, where farmers and merchants from outside the city walls come to hawk their wares. With winter approaching, the market is full of meat and preserves, but when it reopens in the spring, it'll look very different. Most poor families can't get by on wages alone, though, so their children will go out foraging in the local forest to help pick up the slack and also get firewood. Winter presents the rare opportunity to harvest perus, odd coconut-like fruit that grow on trees made of ice in the early morning before disappearing in the mild heat of the midday sun. Also, once a year, commoners will gather at local farms for a big communal pig slaughtering festival where everyone gets to take home their share of smoked and dried meat. With these non-perishables in storage, families can hunker down in their homes and work on handicrafts, trinkets to be sold for extra cash come spring, clothes to wear for the coming year, that sort of thing. When the snow thaws, adults head back to their jobs at guild-associated workshops, while children who come of age, that age being 7, get ready to start apprenticeships that will define their future careers, and the younger ones return to foraging, helping out however they can. Many fantasy stories help you develop an understanding of the history and political and economic systems that drive their worlds, but few let you get so familiar with the rhythms of everyday life there. And this is just what the show manages to establish about a single season in the 3 episodes or so it takes for mine to achieve basic literacy. And diving into such mundane minutia would be the height of authorial self-indulgence, were it not ultimately the driving point of the entire story. Bookworm is ostensibly about Mine's quest to live a life surrounded by books in a world without paper or printing presses, but that's mostly just a motivation for her to push against the rigid class system and slightly softer cultural assumptions that define what her life in this world can and cannot be. The series is really about people and the way the society they grow up in and their position within it shapes their perspectives, attitudes, and ambitions in life. Before Mine and Lutz start their papermaking business, for instance, the simple idea of saving money in a secure external location is utterly foreign to him, and to both of their families, which makes sense. Before she started inventing shit, they rarely had spare cash on hand to begin with, and when they did, it was in small enough quantities to safely stash away in hidey holes within their homes. The idea of having so much that it's not safe to keep around is unfathomable to them. The series leverages Mine's, or rather Urano Motosu's, position as an isekai outsider to highlight the many subtleties like this that give the city of Ehrenfest a unique sense of place and culture. That fresh perspective does often help her friends and family see past the perceived limitations of their respective lots in life, but it also puts her at a bit of a disadvantage in social situations, especially as she and Lutz enter the world of trade and business, where manners are of prime importance. Though a lot of people do give her a limited free pass just for being a well-spoken 6-year-old, she has to spend a not insignificant amount of time unlearning the Japanese cultural norm of bowing one's head in apology. This is a society that values eye contact, and her impulse to prostrate herself when she begs ends up costing her the first chance she gets to touch a book, simply because it makes her seem weird and untrustworthy to the merchant who owns it. That specific action also has a religious connotation in this world, which may have been a factor, but I'm getting ahead of myself. One of the more subtle things Mine must learn in the first season is how to say no, simply and directly, when laying out the terms of a business deal. In Japanese culture, a simple, curt denial is generally seen as impolite, so it's common etiquette to respond to unwanted requests with uncertainty, giving the other party a chance to back down gracefully. To a European, hawkish businesswoman like Frida, though, that sounds like haggling and only encourages her to make a pushier offer. Are you beginning to see what I mean when I say that map was scary? Mia Kazuki has crafted Bookworm's world in painstaking enough detail to make this kind of nuanced cross-cultural miscommunication possible. And it doesn't just stop with the clash between Tokyo and Ehrenfest. After she becomes an apprentice priestess in Season 2, Mine needs to learn a whole new set of norms and behaviors to fit in with the nobility of the church, and her attendants likewise struggle to avoid standing out when they're with her downtown. The fidelity in which this world is rendered is frankly ridiculous, but it's also warranted given how much of the plot is driven by carefully balanced negotiations and deceptions where the subtleties really matter. Paying attention to this information makes the action of the story much more engaging, and also delights the nerd in me to no end. I can tell you how folks in this city count on their fingers, German style, starting with the thumb. I can even tell you how downtown Ehrenfest smells, like downtown San Francisco. That is to say, like shit. Also animal blood, if the market's open, but mostly shit. Because the extent of indoor sewage disposal in this part of the world is the classic combo of chamber pot and window. And that turns out to be plot important. The smell really catches Mine off guard when she first steps out into the streets with her mother to shop, though with time she does get used to it. In a side story OVA released between seasons, Eustachius, a noble sent by the church to spy on Mine before she's formally inducted as a priestess, also balks at the smell. His green-haired companion Eckerd is rendered bedridden by his pathetic inability to stomach it. Their reactions differ from Mine's in that they hold their noses up not just at the place, but the people for letting it get that way. But of course, it's really their fault, or at least the fault of their class in aggregate. That they're not used to this smell is proof that better methods of waste management do exist in this world. Possibly plumbing, but more likely some solution involving the magic that the world's nobility has claimed as its sole domain. Whether nobles have special poop portals that leave their leavings elsewhere, or else they just shit on the floor and zap it away Harry Potter style, that magic technology has not yet been disseminated to the masses. Mine's friends, family, and neighbors live in squalor because they've never been given another option. They likely don't even know one exists. Ignorant populations are much easier to control, after all, and easier to look down on. As part of his investigation, Eustachius disguises himself as a farmer by dressing up in filthy rags, hunching his back, and adopting an exaggerated dialect. A performance Eckerd finds completely convincing. The people he's trying to fool, on the other hand, less so. Everyone he talks to in town immediately sees through his folksy idiot act and overly shabby outfit, save for a few literal children who take an extra minute or so to catch on. And how could they not? His line of questioning is so stupidly direct, his disguise so mismatched to his surroundings, and the backstory used to justify it so flimsy and unconvincing that you'd have to be a complete idiot.
Okay, so that layer
is... Or you'd have to think the people you're fooling are complete idiots. Eustachius really has no less contempt for the poor than Eckerd does. He's just slightly better at hiding it. All of this can be inferred from just a short 15-minute vignette because the show has done such thorough legwork in establishing what the common folk of Ehrenfest are really like. So it's immediately obvious how unlike them Eustachius's minstrel act really is. We know how they talk. We know how they dress themselves. We know where and how they conduct what kinds of business. So all it takes is one side-eyed glance from Lutz's mom and a single line about how farmers don't come round these parts for us to instantly understand that this plan is doomed to failure. But neither noble can see it, because they're really just as ignorant about the commoner's way of life as the commoners are about the nobles. Though in their case, it's by choice. The nobles of Ehrenfest prefer the struggles of the peasantry be kept out of sight and mind, locked away outside their gate. Not dissimilar to how the church treats a certain other smelly, unfortunate place that the blue robes can't be bothered with. The poor are encouraged to view their unseen masters in much the same way. Even Mine's father, a soldier, is utterly unconcerned with a coup in the capital that transpired a few years back. He thinks it's their business, not his. And And considering what Thule says in episode 14 about common folk being cut down for simply looking at nobles the wrong way, and the way the High Priest confirms it, you can hardly blame him for wanting to keep his distance. But even as a rarely seen, far-off source of fear, the nobility does harm to the common people on a daily basis by denying them opportunities, tools, and even basic information about the way their world works, beyond how to read and write, I mean. It takes mine 7 episodes to learn that magic exists in this world at all. And she only gets the opportunity because Otto introduces her to his merchant brother-in-law, Benno, who does business with noble clientele. In this moment, all of a sudden, it's like she's stepped into a wholly different world. That same sensation is felt again when she enters the church for her baptism and is treated to an absolutely massive lore dump about the world's pantheon via the Holy Scriptures. Also, the fact that the church prays with the Glicoman pose followed by a Dogeza bow heavily implies that its founder was a fellow victim of isekaitis, but that's kind of beside the point. By controlling where and when we learn what key facts about its world, Bookworm is able to convey the class divisions that define it on a subconscious level, long before the High Priest starts treating Gunter and Effa like something he found on his shoe. And this imbalance in the distribution of knowledge has real, potentially deadly consequences. The chief opposing force of the first season's plot is a mysterious fever that overtakes Mine's frail body at inopportune moments, hitting her hardest when her bookmaking efforts are hampered and her frustration spikes, or she otherwise contemplates giving up. But all she knows about it is what she's learned from experience. Her family has no idea what's causing it. It's only in episode 6, after she meets Benno, that she learns the name of her disease, the devouring, which, as it turns out, isn't a disease at all. It's merely a symptom of being born with excess mana, one that's easily treated with the right tools. But those tools are magical items, which are for noble use only, except when lending merchants a magical contract or lock can help protect their profits, that is. And besides that, the existence of peasants with magic is inconvenient to a noble class that's painted magical ability as a sign of their inherent right to rule. So, even though they could easily save kids with the devouring by asking them to donate mana to the church, and that would also solve a mana deficit that's threatening the town's future harvests, they just don't. They don't even tell them what's killing them. They do extend a slim lifeline to a lucky few lower-class business partners, like Frida's grandfather, the guildmaster, by selling them defective magical items, but they do so at an enormous markup, with the expectation that once they come of age, kids with the devouring will submit to a life of servitude under a noble in exchange for the privilege of not dying. And again, they're the lucky ones. The nobles would rather let countless children perish from a preventable ailment, or maybe inadvertently force-choke their families to death in a magically enhanced temper tantrum, than risk upsetting the one-sided status quo that makes their lives of excess possible. And if that strikes you as cartoonishly, unrealistically wicked, well, you probably haven't been watching much news lately. Crucially, though, most of the nobles we meet aren't framed as being inherently evil, per se. They're just uncaring, selfish, and ignorant. Attitudes that are as much a product of their own experiences with the class system as the attitudes of Mine's family are of theirs. Nobles in this society are kept out of contact with commoners, which increases the sense of otherness that divides them. And they're pushed to compete with one another, especially their closest relatives, for status and wealth. Those who are lucky get to inherit their family's power. Those who aren't are sent to work at the church. It's a cutthroat, backstabbing society that produces cutthroat, backstabbing people. Even those who do genuinely care for the plight of others, like the head priest, are pressured to hide their true feelings and uphold the social order, or else leave themselves vulnerable to usurpation. It's little wonder that the orphans these people raise to be their gray-robed slaves with extra steps mimic this scheming and self-interest, especially when they're made to compete with each other just for the chance to eat. Keep in mind, I'm still working my way through that first volume. All of this is just what I've been able to surmise from the 4.5 episodes the series has thus far dedicated to exploring the nobility-adjacent culture and internal politics of the church. Mine really is is stepping into a new world in this new season, and given the slow burn nature of this series, it's safe to say that we've barely scratched its surface. And that's just the world of the temple. The castle and noble quarter are a whole other world unto themselves that the series has only hinted at so far. This kind of storytelling may not be as obviously thrilling as grand, globe-trotting adventures full of monsters and magic and big epic battles, but to me, it's no less exciting to see a picture of an unreal place painted in such exquisite and believable detail. The questions of why a world is the way it is and how that affects the people who live there are endlessly fascinating, and there's just as much drama and danger to be found in the streets of a single city as there is in an entire nation, if you know how to look for it. Or if you're a crazy person like Eiichiro Oda, you can do both and spend 2 decades of your life writing the same manga, but that's a topic for several other videos. If what I've talked about today intrigues you and you haven't yet watched Bookworm, well, you know what to do. But also, I must reiterate that this video is based almost entirely on the anime, and there are many deeper layers of lore and characterization to be found in the source material, which you can read on Bookwalker. Bookwalker, if you didn't...
Yeah, I'm gonna skip that. Let's talk about cutscene incompetence. Semi-Ramblematic from Second Wind. Hi, Yahtzee.
Some of my viewers have this idea they can predict what my semi-rams are going to be about based on what I say in my fully rams, and it disappoints me to prove them right. I try to live up to the image of the unpredictable devil-may-care bad boy, but for those of you who commented on my Ghost of Yotei review saying they assume I'll soon be doing a semi-ram on the subject of cutscene incompetence, congratulations. Here it is, have a fucking biscuit. Cutscene incompetence meaning the infuriating tendency of certain video game player characters to mysteriously lose all the effectiveness they routinely demonstrate in regular gameplay the moment it would be inconvenient for the rigidly linear plot. Ghost of Yotei suffers a lot from this. Over and over again does the main character Atsu cross paths with the masked Gits upon whom she has sworn revenge, and over again does she miss the opportunity to kill them because cutscene Atsu was in charge, when at all other times gameplay Atsu only needs close range line of sight and a convenient patch of untended grass to get a guaranteed kill. I mentioned a particularly egregious moment when we're literally above the main villain, undetected, with an assassinate prompt floating over his head, and yet Atsu misses the stab for no clear reason, when in gameplay she's perfectly capable of making standing 10-foot leaps to insta-kill far beefier targets. I'm not stupid. The plot had made it abundantly clear that the story was over when this dude died, and a single press of the contextual assassinate button hardly smacked of a final boss fight. Plus, multiple characters hadn't resolved their arcs yet. But for what it's worth, that did mean the game had a chance to surprise me. Let me kill the twat, then reveal after the fact that he had some kind of justification. Have his vengeful family come after us, just as we went after him, and force Atsu to confront her own actions now she's lost the moral high ground. Sadly not. Instead, the game insults my intelligence by trying to get me to think this was going to go like a normal assassination, something I did not believe for a second, and then pulled the rug out, tacitly crowing that it had tricked me with its clever subterfuge. But it hadn't. It had basically pushed me down onto a whoopee cushion that I had easily spotted, and then laughed at me for falling for their prank. Another classic example is that one bit in Far Cry New Dawn, where before you walk into a room to confront the main villains, the villains in question tell you to drop all your guns and handcuff yourself to the ceiling. And instead of letting us say, "That's a big piss off from me, good buddy," the only way to progress is to press the contextual button prompt to do exactly as they say. And of course it ends very poorly for us, because what the fuck would you expect? This sort of thing is frustrating for players because in essence gameplay is about making appropriate responses to incoming signals, and this is taking away our ability to make the appropriate response. By all means trap the player, ambush the player, but if they see the ambush coming and aren't permitted to prepare or change course, then that breaks the tacit contract of video games that the player can succeed as long as they're skilled or smart enough. Perhaps talking about this in terms of success and failure is confusing because from the game's point of view, the player is succeeding by getting to the next bit of the plot, even if it's presented as the protagonist fucking up. So when you get right down to it, cutscene idiocy is a framing problem. It's kissing cousin to the frustration of winning a boss fight and then the boss defeating the protagonist anyway in the ensuing cutscene. It makes one wonder why we should bother to try, and raises the question of why dying at any point during the fight wouldn't have had the same result. On the other side of the coin is the related issue of cutscene overcompetence, wherein the protagonist demonstrates skill and hardiness that is unavailable to the player in standard gameplay. We might as well just call that Devil May Cry syndrome, because Dante from those games can never get through a new weapon introduction without getting impaled on it at least once, and at all other times carks it pretty easily from all the standard methods. The problem with this kind of thing is that it makes the player feel like the passenger rather than the driver of the train. Why are we stuck with the boring old light attack, heavy attack, dodge, parry, double jump routine when cutscene Dante seems to be having a hell of a lot more fun than us? I wonder if this is what led to the practice of the in-cutscene QuickTime event, where we're given a token button press to keep the exciting action sequence going. But those always make me feel condescended to, like when a fireman lets a small child hold the hose for a second and wear the big red hat. Both cutscene incompetence and cutscene overcompetence are examples of ludonarrative I threw up a little bit in my mouth trying to say that we might group together under the heading of player protagonist disconnect. But I want to stress that that's not something one should always avoid. In fact, if your protagonist has any characterization at all, their personality will be expressed entirely in the gap between them and the player. A deliberate surgical use of player protagonist disconnect is a very effective tool in interactive narrative. It's surprising for the player when their character appears to deliberately defy them, and that being the case, it can be leveraged for both comedy and horror. I think I've mentioned before that the Monkey Island games had a recurring gag where we, the player, would choose some kind of bold, potentially antagonistic dialogue line, but Guybrush would overrule us, wimp out and say something neutral to emphasize that he's too much of a coward to follow through on his initial thought. Then there's the gag at the start of Portal 2, where Wheatley is checking to see if we're brain damaged, and the prompt press space to say apple comes up, and of course all it does is make you jump. Player protagonist disconnect can also be used to make a character more compelling. The example that's leaping to mind for me now is Silent Hill 2. Aha, just kidding. See, I don't have to bring that game up every bloody week. I was actually thinking of Nine Souls. Yeah, didn't see that coming, did ya? In Nine Souls, protagonist Yi spends most of his time dutifully playing the part of the taciturn, determined badass type, usually called for by an action revenge fest, but you can tell from the start that there's a lot going on upstairs we don't know about. He's not a young Kratos-style mindless destructor. He's got plans. The defining moment of the game for me is the Gumang boss fight. She's this evil bat lady who's using technology to mind control people with the usual classist justifications, and Yi makes the usual mouth noises, how could you do this, freedom is sacred, etc. But the boss fight ends with Yi fucking hacking Gumang's legs off, leaving her wide-eyed and twitching on the floor. Then, after she makes a stock, oh how could you have defeated my perfection sort of speech, Yi coldly and determinedly walks up and forces her into one of her own slave collars, leaving her alive with no legs in a permanent brain-suppressed hell. And I was like, fuck, I didn't tell you to do that, Yi, you ruthless son of a bitch. But his character became so much more interesting for it, as I'm forced to wonder if he's really in the right here, in a way I wouldn't if I was dealing with a protagonist who just does what they're told and is more or less blandly in favour of doing the right thing. So, what makes that, in my mind, a valid use of player-protagonist disconnect, in contrast to what was going on with Atsu in the Ghost of Yotei example? Well, the obvious difference is that Nine Souls takes control from us so that Yi can have a moment that defines his personality and make him a stronger character, whereas in Ghost of Yotei, control is taken from us so that Atsu can fuck up, like a great big doofus, which doesn't really gel with the rest of her character arc. It reminds me of all those times the floor just randomly collapses under Nathan Drake or Lara Croft for no clear reason, adding who knows how many hours onto the playtime just to get back to where we already were. It never fails to frustrate because it feels like the game's wasting our time, even if it is preordained by the critical path. So, would Atsu's big fuck-up have been improved if it were because of a conscious decision she was making, something that might add to her character? Like if she aborted the stab at the last minute because she noticed the guy was wearing a baby harness or something. Maybe. Might come across as hypocritical, considering all the orphans she's already created by this point in the game. Or just don't have the guy in a vulnerable position in the first place because he's too smart. I don't know, there's probably a lot of options. And ultimately, I guess the final point to take away from this video is be less shit at writing games. You hear that, industry? You know all that shit writing you do? Well, do less of it. You're welcome. Please subscribe to the channel for more searing insights.
This video is brought to you by Playtrack.
Tracker, the app that tracks your cross-platform game library, achievements,
Oh
stats,
my
and
God,
more.
that-
Play Tracker works by connecting to
that
various
was
gaming
beautiful.
platforms and
Thank you,
combining all
Yahtzee.
your data in one place. It offers a unified cross-platform social experience, advanced game library labeling and sorting, fun challenges and progression system, and stats about games and the types of players who enjoy them. Play Tracker is for all kinds of gamers, like this one.
My top tags across all platforms are dating sim and psychological hoarder. I'm sure that says nothing about me as a person.
And this one.
Huh, my mate Captain Toe Jam 96 and I have a lot of games in common. We should tackle some challenges together.
And even me. I'm better than all of you. Unite your gaming multiverse with Play Tracker today and join the official Second Wind Guild to unlock exclusive profile decorations by playing games recommended by us, a group of ostensibly professional gamers with allegedly great taste in games. Ooh.
I like. Jesus Christ. God, I love Yahtzee. And his new team is so much better than the Escapists, too. Fucking love these guys. A painfully honest review of Platinum End. Sure, I'll watch an hour video, well, listen to an hour video about a show I've never seen before.
Hey, so this anime I'm about to spend, what am I doing with my life, minutes discussing, centers its narrative heavily around the subject of self-harm, and also it leans heavily on cheap shock value, from lurid violence against women and children as a crutch to get through all the boring bits, and I figure that deserves a content warning, so this is that. Sugumi Oba and Takeshi Obata are a talented shonen manga-making writer-artist duo, perhaps best known for their Shonen Jump manga about making Shonen Jump manga, Bakuman. But they also produced this somewhat obscure mystery horror series you might have heard of called Death Note, about how there's this book that if you write a person's name in it, they die, and this Japanese honor student decides he's going to use it to kill all the crime. So, of course, a genius super detective starts gunning for him, and he has to contrive situations where if that detective says, hey, got any death notes? He can say, nope, go fish. I am, of course, doing a bit here. Death Note is insanely popular. In fact, before Attack on Titan, it was the most popular anime of all time on the anime list, which doesn't mean much, actually, since they really only accurately represent the tastes of English-speaking parts of Asia. But anecdotally, as someone who attended quite a few anime conventions in the mid to late 2000s, I can attest that you could not go more than 5 feet without bumping into a Death Note cosplayer. And only like 80% of those were guys in eyeliner with jeans and a white shirt. Death Note was huge in North America. Bigger than the big three, arguably, and it's still big today. Its moody, atmospheric style and intensely cerebral...
L has to be the easiest cosplay to manage. It's basically just a wig and eyeliner. Everything else you can do, no problem.
37 episodes, it sits
You should
in a
already
very
have the rest of the outfit.
background for anime newbies, offering a satisfying binge watch without demanding anywhere near as much commitment as most other big Shonen Jump things. Thanks to this, it's held a place of prominence as one of the premier gateway anime for the better part of 2 decades now, and as such has become a core memory for at least 2 generations of English-speaking anime fans. When a show's that important to that many people, it's only natural for them to get excited about the people who made it making another thing that looks like it. And it's equally natural after said show moves past the bit where an otherworldly creature gives its despondent student protagonist the power to kill or control anyone anywhere and tells him to do with it as he pleases, and on to the bit where he uses that power to make his abusive aunt want to bang him so she'll admit to murdering his parents for their inheritance and then kill herself, for those same people to say, excuse me, Mr. Oba, sir, but, what the fuck? Death Note was never exactly subtle, and it was always more than a little edgy, but not hypno-incest-suicide edgy, not mind-control rape orgy edgy, not torture and murder an actual child in front of a baseball stadium full of people edgy. And that's just the first 4 episodes of Platinum End. This show seems almost
desperate to grab and hold its audience's attention through sheer force of controversy. Yet somehow not one of those goofy-ass over-the-top scenes manages to be even half as entertaining or intense as a dude eating chips. Now, part of that, to be fair, is a problem of adaptation that has nothing to do with OVA or Obata. Death Note's Tetsuro Araki is one of the best directors working in anime today. A master of narrative tension and creative camera work who can make even a complete dud of a story feel like a banger, and when he gets his hands on something like Death Note or Attack on Titan, turn it into the biggest thing ever. In contrast, Platinum End's Kazuchika Kisei has decades worth of credits as an animation director, the guy who makes the show look good, but his only experience actually setting the tone for and deciding the pace of a story prior to this was on the Ghost in the Shell Arise movies, which were okay, I guess, and okay simply doesn't cut it when you're drawing comparisons to Death Note. Any normal director trying to fill shoes as big as Araki's is bound to end up looking like at least a bit of a clown, even working with the best of source material. But also, Kisei definitely was not working with the best of source material. Okay, so for those of you who only clicked on this because of Death Note and don't know the first thing about what I'm talking about, what's the deal with Platinum End? What's it all about? To put it simply, God is dying, so he sends 13 angels of varying rank down to Earth to select 13 humans as candidates for his replacement. To aid them in this process, these humans are all allowed to borrow abilities from the angels who picked them. Wings that let them fly faster than light, and 2 arrows, red and white, that make their target fall in love with the shooter and instantly kill the target, respectively. The abilities they get are determined by the rank of their angel, which is in turn determined by God's completely opaque and seemingly arbitrary value system. Second-rank angels can hand out either wings or a red arrow. First-rank angels get to do both, and special-rank angels get both, plus a white arrow. And they have 999 days to play around with these powers and figure out which one of them deserves to be God. This premise really isn't all that different from your typical Future Diary-style Battle Royale setup, save for 2 small details that do make a pretty big difference. The first difference is the selection process. Instead of being picked from all walks of life, every God candidate is someone who has given up on life, because God reasons, those people have the most motivation to change the world. Additionally, every candidate was chosen from within Japan due to the country's unusually high suicide rate relative to its average standard of living. There are other countries that fit that criteria better, like South Korea and, since 2016, the United States, but this has long been a topic of intense discussion in Japan, so I think that much at least makes sense. The other bigger difference is this isn't, technically speaking, a battle royale at all. All that's really required for God to be selected is for every living God candidate to agree on who it should be, which makes sense. It's a philosophical question that doesn't really have to and arguably shouldn't be solved with violence. Though it totally can, because being the only living God candidate is one obvious way to fulfill all those conditions. And considering that one of those arrows is just a diet Death Note and none of the candidates were in the best headspace to begin with, it's a pretty
screaming
sure
noises.
that it will. Much
Hello.
to the chagrin of standard Death Battle soft boy pacifist pro tag number 42069, Mirai Kakehashi, literally Bridge to the Future, whose only goal is to be happy. And not just in the general sense that every character wants to be happy by achieving their other goals, his mandate from his angel savior Nase is to find out what happiness means in a philosophical sense and then acquire it. And, of course, he can't do that if people die, because people dying is always sad, which is actually a very compelling argument for pacifism, if you think about it, despite its apparent simplicity. even if you're driven entirely by a selfish desire to maximize your own happiness, unless you're incapable of feeling empathy, that happiness will inevitably be reduced by every human tragedy you become aware of, especially if you had a hand.
Time for sleep.
When they kill, even in self-defense, most
People dying is very sad.
intensely guilty over the life they took.
Do you want to go to bed now? People dying is very sad. Look, I know that sounds really dumb, and it kind of is, but I actually think it is an interesting philosophical take to present because of how contradictory it is to most like fiction. Violence is extremely popular in fiction. Like it's frankly absurd to even need to clarify that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like even in this game, right? This game. Oh, yeah, now I gotta go one more. But that will have to be after I go mining.
Well, I'm going to bed. You don't have to join me.
But I should join you. Shouldn't I? Hello, I want you to be very, very honest with me. Do you want me to go to bed with you? I'm still waiting on an answer, love. Nope, and I think you just stopped watching. I'll wait for them to respond.
And especially over the people left behind by the victim. Mirai learns this firsthand when his aunt dies. Even though she was horrendously abusing him, helped to murder his parents, and chose to kill herself, he's sad for her shitty, spoiled kids, and even his uncle. Not sad enough to not put the uncle in jail, but still. So he's got a real, concrete, philosophical motivation to avoid killing at all costs. Not just the innate, naive aversion to violence that most teenage death game protags drop by the second arc. He's kind of like an inverse Light Yagami, driven by an opposite but equally strong conviction that all human life, even pure evil life, deserves to be preserved. And at least on paper, that could be pretty cool. It's neat to see a hero really put those ideals to the test in a scenario where the violence is coherently character motivated instead of just being an unavoidable part of the game, and if he kills, there's no excuse for it. Of course, by having Mirai stick to those particular convictions that hard while being one of the few characters in the game with an insta-death arrow, you do run the risk of fan backlash at the hero being a do-nothing pansy who forces his friends to do all the unpleasant stuff for him, but so long as the antagonists are equally grounded in their motivations and actions, and he's not letting some crazy anime atrocities slide. Was that? He's got to fight a reject Metal Gear Solid boss who dual-wields anti-tank guns and a psycho junkie bikini nurse whose hobby is making deadly viruses because she does so many drugs so much, and she threatens to blanket Tokyo with a virulent strain of genetically modified airborne skin-melting super AIDS, and they were both given their powers by a rich megalomaniacal Emoto guy cosplaying as a superhero who also previously gave flight and brainwashing powers to a teenage lesbian serial killer so he could use her as bait to catch other god candidates with a massive bomb he planted in Tokyo Tower. Also before that, he killed a bunch of other people, including a child, but only after making another guy with wings who was handcuffed to that child almost tear her arm out of its socket in front of an entire baseball stadium full of people. And Mirai still doesn't kill anyone? What do you mean he kills the virus? Wait, actually that's a really clever solution to that problem. But what about the big bad? How's he get got? Mirai and his girlfriend hold him down and make an old man with lung cancer do it? And said old man specifically uses the last ounce of strength in his entire body before he dies from the lung cancer to pull the trigger? Also, because his super speed wings are out, the bad man experiences his death by high-powered anti-armor volley and super slow motion like it's the end of Dread. Okay, that's pretty metal. And Old Man Mukaido did have a pretty big murder boner for Metro Polyman at the end there, so in context, it is actually quite a nice final gesture on Mirai and Saki's part to let him do that. But still, in most other cases, even as someone who fundamentally agrees with the protagonist's moral philosophy, it is deeply fucking frustrating to watch him repeatedly refuse to do the one thing that would definitely stop all the killing, even when his own inaction directly causes other characters to die horribly like 2 seconds later. By the midpoint of this show, Mirai's carrying more L's than a convention center in 2007, which we will talk about in greater depth, but I just dropped 3 new names on you out of nowhere, so I guess I better explain who they are first. Saki used to be Mirai's childhood friend until his parents died and his aunt and uncle started pouring alcohol on him and just really treating him like crap, and then the kids at school made fun of him for that. But he's still got a crush on her, and he finds out that she's a god candidate too when she ambushes him with a red arrow. What a spicy surprise, except not really. This causes him to immediately confess the feelings he'd had pent up for years, which makes her really uncomfortable, not, as it would first seem, because she doesn't reciprocate the feelings, but rather because she acted as a bystander when the other middle schoolers bullied him in order to fit in, and then, when she went to apologize for that on graduation day, she saw him jump off a skyscraper, and that's why she met her angel. So, yeah, a lot of baggage needs unpacking before they can enjoy that honeymoon. But when that's done, you better believe that their love affair is as hot and steamy as a raw carrot, with the kind of scintillating romantic chemistry you can only get from the man who wrote Misa Misa. Saki and Mirai have their issues, big ones, but at heart they're fundamentally nice, straightforward kids who just want what's best for everyone, if possible, which, for the narrative purposes of an edgy superhero death game type thing, makes them extremely bland and predictable characters whose role is solely reactive. They either try to stop bad guys from doing bad things or try to help good guys accomplish good things, but rarely do they make choices for themselves. It's only after a tired old former clothing industry guy with lung cancer named Hokkaido brainwashes a bunch of private eyes to help him track down other candidates that they do anything to move the central plot forward at all. And that doesn't happen until episode 5. Hokkaido's a really interesting and unique character for this sort of story, actually, because he doesn't really want to be God and doesn't even think he'll make it to the end of the death game. His only concern is making sure his family's okay after he's gone, and that's what motivates him to proactively go after Metropoliman. He can't rest in peace as long as there's a possibility that the villainous superhero could become God and ruin the world for everyone. Think Walter White if he got superpowers instead of meth. Now, Metropoliman is, in Platinum End's canon, actually the protagonist of a recent and popular Sentai-style superhero TV show whose secret identity is co-opted by a trust fund brat honor student named Kanade Uryu in order to get the public on his side for the whole God selection thing. He's quick to throw that clout away when his superheroics create an opportunity to kill some other candidates, though, because as much as he likes the public adoration, what he really craves is the only kind of power he doesn't already have. And he knows he's probably not going to win that in a fair God election with his God platform of kill all the ugly peasants and enslave the attractive ones, which is basically just a slightly more honest version of what Kira wanted. And in many respects, Uryu is just light Yagami with the narcissism turned up to 11 and the sister complex turned up to 18+. For, in reality, even this grand genocidal ambition is just a cover story for his true, purely selfish desire to see his perfect Emoto one more time in angel form after he accidentally killed her on account of she was thinking about dating another guy, so he pushed her off the castle parapet in their mansion's indoor botanical garden, and then he had a plastic surgeon taxidermy her corpse so he could hang it up in his bat cave. Which he owns because he is literally Bruce Wayne rich. Also, the supersuit's not just a costume, there's a bunch of cutting-edge robotics in there. But luckily, Mukaido's garment industry connections let him even the playing field by making this male Spider-Gwen with bicycle padding type supersuit made out of experimental polymers with carbon lacing that makes it totally stab-proof, which he gives to Mirai while he flies around in a full-blown military-grade bomb suit that would normally be way too heavy to fight in, but thanks to the wings, it's completely trivial to carry that around. Mirai's hero suit is a bit far-fetched in concept, but it is more within the realm of what feels possible in a modern-day setting than what Metropoliman's wearing, and the actual design of it does feel neatly practical. The armored bits are clearly placed to cover vital areas without compromising flexibility, and it does a good job of hiding Mirai's identity without affecting his vision. So anyway, Mukaido also makes a hero suit for Saki that is a robot Catgirl costume with a form-fitting one-hit and your sternum would shatter boob plate and a side skirt that doesn't cover her crotch or butt. Also, the ears double as AR visors that can scan stuff and give her up-to-the-minute information, which she literally never uses, and her tail, which can move, doubles as a heat sink for all the computing power that needs. And Mukaido explains all this before literally turning to the camera and declaring, "It's all very practical, and the costume was clearly built for function over form. What are you talking about? Don't worry about it." And, like, in a vacuum, that could be a pretty funny joke, I guess, but it sounds more than a bit rich coming from a writer who's never been able to write women for shit and also clearly hates them. Now, that is a pretty strong accusation to make. Definitely gotta back that one up. So, source, all of Bakuman, also Misa Misa, or you could just look at this show. Platinum End does contain more prominent female characters than any of Oba's previous work, but those mainly consist of Mirai's selfish, abusive aunt who dies in her lingerie, a little girl who says 3 lines and then gets murdered, the aforementioned psychotic lesbian rapist serial killer and junkie titty ninja nurse, one dead Emoto popsicle, and a lazy, shiftless influencer bimbo who can barely even think for herself and also doesn't really want to, and then her happy ending is she doesn't have to because a rich, smart guy promises to take care of her forever. There are also a few good ones among the show's females, 3 to be exact, including a cops-loving, loyal wife who is his direct subordinate, an unnamed cute girl they put next to this one guy who worships Mirai as a god, so we know he's not gay, and Saki, who starts her arc as an insincere popular girl, but then slowly embraces the simple joys of loving God and cooking for her husband while he watches TV. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong for women to find happiness in things like that if they want to. In fact, one of the smartest things Platinum End has to say in general is that happiness is something we must define for ourselves, not something a higher authority can just hand down to us. All I'm saying is, it's a little telling that all of the surviving guys get happy endings where they're self-actualized within their careers, and all of the women get happy endings where they land a good man's who becomes self-actualized within his career, and they help. Remember, this is the same mind that could only conceive of a lady FBI agent as the wife of a more successful male FBI agent. And then she ended up being way too cool and good at her job anyway, which made Oba nervous, so as soon as she started doing stuff, he conveniently tossed her right in front of Kira and killed her off like a coward. And then Nisio Isin kind of sort of fixed that by making her the main character of a spin-off light novel in which she and Elle investigate the graphically cryptographic serial murders of 3 LA citizens named Believe Bridesmaid, Quarter Queen, and Backyard Bottom Slash. Those are not nicknames. That is simply what the guy who wrote Monogatari thinks North American names sound like. And who am I to argue with the man who ruined toothbrushes? Definitely not Jeff Thew. Probably something like Garfield Thundercheeks. I don't know. What was I talking about? Right, misogyny. There's a lot of it, in general, but also specifically in things that Tsugumi Oba writes. And that doesn't invalidate all of the other things that his stories do exceptionally well, or in some cases better than anything else out there, but neither do those good points erase the multiple pages that Chapter 2 of a manga ostensibly about how cool manga is chooses to dedicate to the semi-autobiographical protagonist who is canonically a genius, ranting about how the really smart schoolgirls aren't the ones who get the best grades, but the ones who know their place and set their ambitions accordingly. Fucking yikes,
yeah, no, that's
man.
right.
Yeah, Oba used to have a really bad writing habit of making his characters launch into out-of-place soapbox rants about whatever topics got him hot and bothered like that. But with Platinum End, it got really, really bad. Just so much worse. And also, all those good points I was talking about are kind of completely missing here, which only makes the awkward insertion of his opinions and old-timey Don Draper-level sexism stand out all the more. Which isn't to say that he's not also capable of writing equally terrible male characters. Hajime Sokotani's sole-defining trait is that he was the world's ugliest poor kid. So poor that he was born in a shed under a bridge, and so ugly that literally not even his mother could love his face, and eventually she Sayori'd herself herself just to get away from it. After he meets his angel for what should be self-explanatory reasons, Hajime uses his red arrows to brainwash a plastic surgeon into turning him into a JoJo villain, but then every time he tries to talk to a girl, his face spontaneously turns into a horse's face, so he realizes the rich, charismatic Metro Polyman is just inherently better than him and decides to worship that guy and also try to be his servant. And luckily, the plastic surgeon that he brainwashed just coincidentally happens to be the same one who told Metro Polyman how to taxidermy his Emoto, so Hajime is able to track him down at his rich kid's school and then somehow remodel the dance studio there without anyone noticing to show him his foolproof plan for catching God candidates, which is to trap them in a tiny room with a one-way mirror where you can shoot them with the arrow and they can't fly away. The pair puts this brilliant plan into action by changing the locks on the local abandoned theme park's giant one-way mirror ball, which, as we all know, is a very common and popular and real fairground attraction because everyone loves being stared at by a public square full of strangers that they can't see. That's more fun than roller coasters. And Hajime also coincidentally managed to torture Mukaido's identity out of one of his private detectives, so his wife and daughter get tossed inside the mirror ball as bait. And because you can only ever carry one other person per set of wings, regardless of weight, both the old guy and Mirai end up trapped in there, flying in faster-than-light circles all night long while Hajime stands lookout and Metro Polyman goes back to his house for a beauty nap. Saki can't join the fight yet because she doesn't have her wings, so while all this is going on, her angel Revel starts applying bubbles of heavenly knowledge directly to his forehead for a rank up, which is apparently way harder than it looks because eventually he just gets too tired to do it, so he cries, and then, because apparently that's the first time that an angel has ever cried for a human being in all of history, he gets a promotion anyway, from Angel of Trickery to Angel of Emotion, and Saki finally gets her wings, just in time to sneak up on Hajime and hit him with a red arrow. And that makes him instantly change sides, of course. Not just because he's suddenly simping for her, because his Metro Poly simping totally cancels that out, but also because this is the first time that he's ever felt love in his entire life, and that causes him to spontaneously develop an appreciation for the innate value of all human life. Like, when Mukaido first put his life on the line for his family, Hajime was all like, ew, gross, that's dumb and makes me mad, but now he totally gets it. Just in time to smash up the mirror ball, and then, after Metro Polyman arrives with the aforementioned Metal Gear Solid reject and Titty Nurse in tow, he ends up taking a poison syringe bullet for Saki that she was trying to take for Hajime, and dies. Completely unnecessarily, since Hajime is covered head to toe in high-tech stab-proof future fabric that I guess Oba forgot about for a second there, but at least he takes the Titty Nurse terrorist out with him by accidentally dropping his sword between her titties, which she doesn't even notice for a second there because she's just so aroused at the sight of his body turning into chicken McNugget paste. Now, obviously, there's a lot of problems with the character arc I just outlined. One might go so far as to say that the whole thing is made of problems, but don't let that dog shit character writing distract you from how even more dog shit the action scene you just saw was. It is wild to me that a fight of that quality could ever make it into a Jump magazine, even a spin-off like Jump Square. But I guess that's what clout gets you, no matter how you actually earn it. Oba and Obata made a name for themselves in the world's most popular paper-based wrestling promotion for children by crafting interpersonal interactions between edgy smartasses that felt exactly as intense as a kid whose dad just died bumping laser dicks with the cyborg cockroach who exploderized him. And with Bakuman, they cemented their place as the undisputed kings of that sort of non-battle anime. That's their brand as a creative team, the thing their audience shows up for. And as an artist, I can certainly respect the desire to move outside a comfort zone like that and grow as creators, but no offense, fellas, nobody wanted to see you do superheroes. Also, you're not good at it. Well, Obata is, but he can draw anything, and even with his highly detailed art, the pacing, posing, and flow of the fights themselves in both the anime and the manga leaves a lot to be desired. His intricate, subtly expressive style is just better suited to dialogue-driven drama than action. But that is at least 10 times more true for Oba's verbose writing style, which does not work for this genre at all. Battle anime holds our interest because dynamic action makes the fight-or-flight part of our marginally upgraded monkey brains go burr. Non-battle anime, lacking the action part of that equation, can only achieve the same effect of life-or-death tension by putting their characters on a razor's edge where failure comes swiftly and decisively, and one mistake can cost them everything. If Mom finds out about the escape plan, we're all dead. If I lose at rock, paper, scissors now, I'll be sold into slavery. Oh God, if I ask for his phone number wrong, the president will know I like him. And, of course, it's Elle versus Kira. Whoever's true identity is revealed first will die. By removing all margin for error from the actual action, non-battle anime effectively transplant all the tension and excitement you'd normally find there to the planning and shit-talking phases of your typical shonen fight encounter. The characters' ability to anticipate each other's moves and their efforts to mislead each other become the most important part of the who will win push and pull equation of the fight. Oba's talent for writing multi-layered, information-dense conversations really shines under these conditions. And, of course, that talent does still have value in a regular old battle anime too, but it's not the main thing people want to see, and if you use it too much, they call that talk no jutsu. When you put on Jujutsu Kaisen or Demon Slayer, you do it not because you want to see people have like a meaningful conversation about their thoughts and feelings on politics, but because you want to enjoy the blow-by-blow back and forth of a good old-fashioned brawl. You want to see characters get beat down and get back up again, overcoming seemingly impossible odds through sheer force of will and skill to prove their values not just through what they say, but what they do, which can't really happen when there's a book that you write people's names in it and then they die immediately for obvious reasons. Or, for that matter, when there's an arrow that you shoot at someone and then the fight's over because they are either brainwashed or dead. That also leaves you with only two defensive options. Either block the arrow with another arrow or with the wings, which are the only thing faster than an arrow. And a good artist can certainly make the execution of both of those types of moves look really cool and skillful, you know, do a last-minute deflection like wha-cha, or have the characters zip around dogfighting each other like it's an extra Jesus-y episode of Dragon Ball Z. Only in Dragon Ball Z, they can also take a hit from an energy blast and then keep going even though they're injured, and that's pretty dramatic. Or they can throw a bigger energy blast, or lots of energy blasts, or an energy wave, or just a punch. It is probably impossible to create good fight choreography out of a combat system that gives your characters only one attack option and two responses. So naturally, Platinum End has to fall back on strategy and mind games to make up that difference, which on paper is a pretty good creative strategy. That is what Oba's best at writing after all. But there's a huge problem baked into this premise, which is that Platinum End's characters still have superhuman physical abilities that make it almost impossible to kill or capture them through most conventional means, which renders them immune to pretty much every regular human sort of mind game. They can only play superhero mind games. And unfortunately for Oba, there are only 3 kinds of superhero mind game. Let's settle this in person as equals, no tricks, but then there are tricks. I figured something out about your secret identity, and do what I say or the hostage gets it. Okay, technically there are 4 if you differentiate between holding lots of randos in a city hostage and holding the hero's specific loved ones hostage, but really the second case is just a hybrid hostage secret identity play. Across Platinum End's 4 big, drawn-out fights, there are 4 different moments where a bad guy uses someone else's leverage to make the hero stand still and await their death, only for something unexpected to happen at the last second and save them. It happens twice in the finale. And on top of that, Metro Polyman uses the threat of killing civilians to draw the heroes out for a confrontation twice. First with the lesbian serial killer and her victims, then with Mukaido's family. He only uses "let's settle this as equals" once to pull in the other god candidates for the slaughter at the baseball stadium, which ends up being the most entertaining action scene in the show, actually, solely by virtue of the fact that the main characters don't get involved because it's such an obvious trap, and the idiots who do show up are under no narrative obligation to use optimal tactics or survive the battle. Mirai also uses the "let's settle this on even ground, no tricks" trick to capture the villain at the end of that arc, but that doesn't really count as a mind game because after the fight it's revealed that Metro Polyman had already been brainwashed and ordered to fall for that specific trick by a kid we've never met before who discovered his true identity off screen. What satisfying storytelling that is. They then learn that kid's true identity, his name is Susumu and he likes to play games, when he reveals it to the world on national television along with his power of flight and the existence of the god candidates, which starts a global debate on the topic and finally pulls the story into the realm of geopolitical and interfactional maneuvering where Oba's most comfortable as a writer. Shame he doesn't really take advantage of that. Speaking of geopolitics, it's kind of hard to tell what with the quality level of the anime's art, but in the manga it's very clear that Susumu is hiding his identity with a Donald Trump mask. Also, his thing is that he's extremely immature and has no real sense of responsibility or actions having consequences, and he thinks that the world would be better off if everyone had a white arrow, which seems like it might be a satirical potshot at the American gun rights lobby, but a very weird and kind of subtweety one for an author who typically just has his characters say exactly what he thinks about things. If that is the point of this character, then his ultimate fate is kind of ironic, I guess. I honestly just don't know what Oba was going for with Susumu, and also he'll be gone soon, so it doesn't really matter, but also it's just way too obvious of a symbol not to mention, especially considering they also made a one-shot where Trump buys a death note and turns it into a metaphor for American foreign policy and also maybe nuclear weapons. I just could not mention it, and since Susumu will die within moments, I had to cram it in somewhere. Anywho, with Metro Polyman gone, the gang can finally start gathering up god candidates to end the selection on a more peaceful note. But now that the world's governments know what they can do, they've got Japanese cops trying to track them down and recruit them to be assassins, and American assassins trying to take them out. And they actually do manage to take out Susumu by sniping him from behind, even though he had his wings out at the time, and I was pretty sure that made bullets move in slow motion, but I guess you have to turn that power on separately, so that means that Metro Polyman willingly experienced his own death in slow motion. I don't know, feels a bit inconsistent, but there's much bigger problems to talk about here. Mainly, the talking, which is almost all that happens for the rest of the show after Metro Polyman's gone. This arc takes up like the last third of the series, but all it's about is introducing the last 3 god candidates who haven't done anything or died yet, having them state what their policies as god would be, and then deciding when to have a final vote on the topic. This process is periodically interrupted by cops and snipers and helicopters showing up and forcing the conversation to change locations, but that's just a pacing trick. The actual story progression is just a straight line through this one big protracted argument. Well, okay, there is one pretty cool action scene mixed in there where they gotta break the influencer lady out of witness protection without compromising the cops who are secretly on their side by making it seem like they've all just been brainwashed by her red arrow. But that's pretty much the only time in the entire story that arrow's used as anything other than a non-lethal alternative to the white arrow or an excuse to make a character do something the plot needs them to do. So in the end, that taste of more creativity only makes you miss what could have been all the more. When I first heard the limitations on that power, that you can only control 14 people at once, they only fall in love for 33 days, and you can only make them do something that they would normally do for love, the gears in my brain immediately started turning, trying to figure out how one of Oba's brilliant schemer characters might work around those limitations. Armed with just 14 or maybe 28 arrows, what pressure points would someone have to hit to effectively take control of, say, the local police force or the government and use that against the other god candidates? How would the other candidates fight back? We never find out. The arrows are eventually used that way, but only to open the way to a final televised confrontation between all the god candidates, which the government then stays out of completely. And the double Nobel Prize-winning super genius who does that doesn't even put in the work to figure out how to control the government. He just hands the prime minister a red arrow and says, hey, shoot the 14 people you think would be most useful, which is actually a very efficient solution to that problem that a character like that would totally come up with. So I can't call it bad writing, but that doesn't make it any less disappointing that we don't get to see the whole political manipulation process play out. I guess there just wasn't time for that with all the talking that had to happen, though. In addition to the influencer lady, who would just make everyone rich if she was God, we have two last candidates left to meet. Shuji Nakaumi is a middle school age shut-in whose whole darn recently divorced family was miserable enough to end it all around the time he met his angel, and then did thanks to his red arrow encouragement. And if he became God, he'd make suicide easier and more socially acceptable to help people like him and his family. Even with his angelic powers, Nakaumi's not all that keen on living, but as the candidates begin to realize that whoever becomes God will have to spend hundreds, maybe thousands of years alone in the spirit world, separated from their loved ones, that actually makes him the least disagreeable candidate, since Saki would really miss Mirai and nobody else wants to do it. So before they even have their final meetings, pretty much everyone's on board to give the kid the job. But there is one last guy who still has to sign off on it, and unfortunately, that guy is Professor Gaku Yoneda, the aforementioned genius winner of Nobel Prizes in both literature and physics. As an ardent atheist, Yoneda believes that God and his angels are actually just parasitic alien entities that feed on the energy of human belief, and the whole selection process is just a trick to keep their power going. So the best thing to do is make sure that no one fuses with the creature called God and the cycle ends. And that argument ends up carrying a lot of weight, in part because Gaku's a very respected scholar who lots of terminally online people look up to, including Nakaumi. But it also holds weight because he's the final candidate backed by a special ranked angel, the insanely creepy angel of destruction, Mooney, which means that he has a white arrow. And while he does go through the trouble of mind controlling the government so everyone can talk things through on TV in a big football stadium, that's actually just an elaborate ruse to make the other candidates let their guards down so he can kill them with that white arrow and then do a simultaneous murder-suicide with Nakaumi, thus ensuring that there will never be just one surviving God candidate who would obviously otherwise automatically become God the second they were the only survivor. And Mirai actually goes into this encounter anticipating the professor's betrayal, finally willing to kill if he's left with no other option, even. But that doesn't actually matter, because then Saki gets tied up with duct tape and held hostage, so he has to just stand still and wait to get yeeted
for the third time in the show. Then at the last second, his angel Nase saves him, just like she did at the start when he jumped, which she's able to do even though normally the real and spirit worlds can't touch each other, because she was born from a single-celled life form that infected a scrape on God's foot when he first came to Earth. But surprise, Yoneda already knew all of that because his angel told him, and it was all part of his master plan all along to make her break the rule that angels can't interfere in the selection, so she gets demoted to rank 2 and Mirai loses his wings, which allows the professor to blackmail him with Saki's life in the exact same way again. Only this time, it's Saki who swoops in to save him at the last second, because it turns out that Nakumi doesn't have it in him to kill someone else who doesn't want to die after all, not even when his favorite influencer tells him to do it. Also, the other influencer tricked him into giving her his white arrow, which she then uses to ambush the professor, but then Nase swoops in to save him at the last minute, and that causes her to immediately get her powers back, literally within the same episode where she lost them, because logically, helping another candidate is the opposite of helping her candidate. That is one of the only 2 times in the entire story that any of the rules surrounding the angels and the ranking system actually matters, and it doesn't actually matter. It's just padding for this encounter. Come to think of it, I haven't really talked about the angels much, have I? Well, the reason for that is they're not actually that important to the story, and the most interesting thing about them is their butts. Except in the manga, where Obata's art is really nice, obviously. He uses this cool screen tone effect for their outlines that makes them look like they're part of the backgrounds and really sells the otherworldly feel of them. But obviously the anime doesn't capture that at all, so there it's just the butts. Of course, they also have personalities, cold, detached, vaguely sociopathic ones that clearly come from the same mind that wrote the Shinigami, and that can be kind of entertaining, but all they ever really use them for is dumping exposition and providing color commentary on whatever the humans are doing. The metaphysical questions the angels raise just by existing are honestly infinitely more interesting than they are as characters. That said, Nase does make a difference right at the end here, and being saved from the brink of death by angels twice now does finally give the professor cause to reconsider how pushy he's being with his particular religious views. So instead of ending the death game with even more death, the candidates are finally able to talk things through and reach a solution that kinda sorta works for everyone. The same solution that everyone agreed on 7 episodes ago, where Nakumi takes the gig because no one else wants it. Only now he also makes a promise to look for answers to the true nature of God and send them back to the professor somehow to help sate his scientific curiosity. And the professor, in turn, promises to financially take care of the influencer girl who has no other marketable skills and is very concerned that she won't be able to influence so good once she loses her red arrow. There are many things about how this whole battle royale shakes out that feel forced and silly, but I do really like that they found a non-violent solution to this conflict, even if it's a kind of contrived one. It shows a real commitment to the theme of pacifism on the part of the authors. It's the one conversation in the show where all the philosophical navel-gazing feels properly justified because it's actually taking the plot somewhere, and most importantly, it takes Yoneda's character in a really interesting direction. Oba has always had a penchant for writing geniuses, and there's a good reason to believe that's because he sees a lot of himself in those sorts of characters. L's habit of sitting barefoot and folding up into himself on a chair as he thinks about investigations is purportedly based on the posture that Oba himself adopts while he's thinking about his stories. L says multiple times that light reminds him of himself, so that connection's obvious, and Bakuman's Takagi is the writer half of a writer-artist duo. Pretty self-explanatory.
And it's easy to look at that trend in Oba's writing and come to the conclusion that the dude's pretty full of himself, an impression that Yoneda doesn't really do much to help at first. Although, the character's design doesn't exactly scream self-aggrandizing self-insert. Gaku is one ugly motherfucker, looking basically like a human version of Ryuk with a bit more nose and slightly narrower wall eyes. On top of that, he's got many of the same mannerisms as L, like constantly being barefoot and fiddling with his feet and talking down to everyone he meets, which instantly become a lot less quirky and charming and a lot more off-putting and weird when the quiet shut-in guy who's doing them isn't hot. Also, when we finally get to the true ending, it proves definitively that the God hypothesis the professor was literally willing to stake his life on is completely and objectively wrong. Writing so many characters like this may well be a sign of Oba's arrogance, but Gaku's tragic flaw is that he's arrogant. Convinced that every conclusion he's ever reached about reality is correct solely on the basis of his own strong logic because he doesn't want to ask anyone else's input. He despises his own fame and wants nothing more than to be left alone with his own thoughts and research. Another reflection of the notoriously reclusive and still anonymous Oba, because other people are a distraction, or at least that's how he rationalizes it. Though really, it's because Gaku doesn't understand others and they kind of scare him. His brain is just geared for scientific logic to the detriment of his emotional intelligence. And while he tries to make up for that by studying psychology, which apparently lets him write a pretty good book, using that in an actual social situation is like trying to learn how to drive by studying engineering. Ultimately, all of his plans are undone by his own failure
theoretically
to
do that.
understand the feelings of the other
You
god
wouldn't be,
candidates.
like, good at
Even
driving,
the one who
but you could
bought
still drive.
all of his books. And in the wake of that, he ends up deconstructing the entire model of genius that both Death Note and Bakuman are built on. After some soul-searching, he concludes that no one person is innately better than another. Some are just built different in ways that happen to leave them more motivated than others to achieve certain things, even if it comes at a detriment to other parts of their lives. He argues that only those achievements in and of themselves, not the people who achieve them, can truly be called genius and deserve the respect that we give that word. This is an incredibly based take, and what's especially based about it is that even if you hate Platinum End and think Oba and Obata have totally lost their mojo since Death Note, that only serves as further evidence of Yoneda's point, which, in a world where many people seriously see characters like Rick Sanchez and Light Yagami as aspirational figures, where sad, lonely kids like Nakaumi really do hang on the words of academic ideologues peddling questionable self-help advice, even as their own mental health fades and the benzos take over, that's an extremely important point for writers like Oba in particular to make. It's also far from the only base take in this series. I already discussed the strong case it makes for pacifism, which this ending reinforces. Kanade Uryu is, despite how poorly the story itself uses him, a hilariously savage caricature of Japan's spoiled capitalist elite that also functions as a deconstruction of Light Yagami's entire archetype, and the show's atheistic model of gods and angels as a sort of symbiotic parasite that feeds on human belief while allowing for the creation of more improbably complex life forms and civilizations is genuinely fascinating and kind of an apt metaphor for how human belief can reshape our reality. I should probably expand on that. Now, obviously, whatever god or gods you, the viewer, specifically believe in are totally real. Don't worry about it. But you do got to admit, all the other phony religions that are just LARPing their gods have still done a ton to shape the development of the societies around them. So, in the sense that they really do have a direct impact on how the world works and how people think, you could say that these gods are real solely because a large number of people believe in them. This is also true of things like borders and money. And if we could channel that power of collective belief more deliberately, we really could build a much brighter future for ourselves, just the way that Yoneda theorizes. Albeit probably without the happy science-style spirit technology angle that a more literal reading of this literary device implies. Speaking of science and happiness, though, Platinum End also offers a logically rigorous examination of happiness and suicide as sort of dualistic philosophical themes. On the former subject, it makes the case that human happiness can only be maximized by giving as many people as possible as many opportunities as possible to find their own kind of happiness. Kind of a basic message by itself, but consider how that ties into the other theme. The actual motivations for each of the individual 13 suicides that incite this whole story vary wildly, but they all boil down to the god candidates being denied the opportunity to pursue happiness by forces outside their control. Be they abusive and controlling family, a society that expects unfair things of them, a fan base that won't leave them alone, the world's ugliest face, or the implacable realities of death and your emoto ain't into incest that no amount of money or power can ever overcome. Platinum End concludes that suicide isn't really an individual choice unless you're born rich, but rather a societal problem that we need societal scale change to effectively combat. I deeply agree with so many of the things that Oba is saying here, and I find even more of the things I don't agree with to at least be thoroughly thought-provoking on paper, but at the end of the day, I'm not out here reviewing a philosophy textbook, I'm an anime critic, and as an anime, Platinum End has bad fights, a plot that is at once rushed and plotting, main characters who are less interesting than everyone around them, side characters who all feel like they belong in completely different genres, one of which is grindhouse pornography, too many meaningless cliffhangers, and on the whole, about 40% too much dialogue. It is a very difficult show to enjoy anyway, but ironically. As I argued in my Cowboy Bebop video, you shouldn't need to agree with a good piece of art to recognize it as good, and by the same token, I can't let the fact that I agree with something blind me to its many glaring faults. That's not to say there's no narrative value in these themes. Platinum End's ending ends up being quite a bit stronger and more memorable than the rest of the show because it uses those ideas to drive the plot forward and focuses on tying them all together in a genuinely surprising way that really adds to them. Whereas Death Note's ending feels weak because it kind of disregards most of the story's themes in favor of showing us a too loud, too long rendition of
some people think they can outsmart me. Maybe. I've yet to meet one that can outsmart a bullet.
But the endings of stories, unlike their intros, don't get to exist in a vacuum. In order for the audience to even care about what an ending is saying or what it does well, the rest of the story has to make them care first. And at that, Platinum End fails spectacularly. At many points, it feels like the only point of the story is to put one of Oba's characters on a soapbox so they can say these things, and that kind of shitty, contrived storytelling only makes it less likely that the audience will take what's being said seriously or give the writer the benefit of the doubt. Which is why, I think, many people will write off this show's genuinely audacious and clever ending as just edgy, try-hard bullshit. I guess we should talk about what happens in that ending, though. Platinum End already subverts the death game format in a way that meaningfully supports its pacifistic themes by having the big dumb final battle fizzle out partway through so everyone can talk things out. But it doesn't stop there with God being chosen. It keeps going. The show cuts between scenes of the god candidates and other characters building new lives for themselves in the wake of everything that happened, and Nakaumi as God-elect, I guess, pondering over the true nature of his existence and the true purpose that he and the angels serve. We learn many curious things about how heaven works in these chapters, like the fact that all the spirits that we've been watching angels drag off throughout the series are actually just like save states of a person's condition in the moment before death, not a true continuation of their consciousness, though they can be used as templates for new angels. That's all pretty neat. Neat enough for God to spend the next 6 years thinking about it, though because time flows a lot slower in heaven, it seems like a lot less than that to him. When he checks back in with his friends, Professor Yoneda seems a lot happier with a lady in his life now, even though he's not really making much progress with understanding the red arrow that Nakagumi left with him. Saki and Mirai are blissfully married and have opened their own flower shop. Hoshi got a promotion to police chief, and Yumiki's still by his side, and every 40 seconds, someone somewhere commits suicide. Which Nakagumi, with his new omniscient perspective, finally understands as something much bigger than an individual choice. It's a big problem that needs to be solved, but one whose solution is far beyond the capacity of any individual, even one with the knowledge and power of God, to solve. Now that his omniscient mind is aware of it, Nakagumi can't very well ignore this, but to even begin addressing it, he'd need to find a way to fundamentally reorganize our entire civilization from a pocket dimension where he can't directly communicate with anyone, which would be hard enough for someone who actually cares like Mirai to do, so Nakagumi doesn't. He just says, "Hey angels, what's that?" and then yeets himself the second they look away. Then, with God gone, all of the angels start disappearing, followed by all life on Earth, starting with the humans. And as our planet is reduced to a dull gray dust ball hanging in the void, eternal beings of pure energy in the distant depths of space lament that this experiment has once again failed to provide them with a way to yeet themselves. And they contemplate sending down a new God seed to try the whole thing again. The end. Unlike Death Note's one-note conclusion, this gives you a lot to chew on. It's not even clear if it's a sad or happy ending. That's ultimately up to your interpretation. Like, yeah, the candidates clearly picked the wrong guy to be God. Mirai would have done whatever he could to help and definitely kept going instead of just giving up, but that would have left him and Saki miserable and alone for the rest of their lives, which in his case would have been centuries or millennia. That's the exact opposite of what Nase and his parents wanted for him. And the 6 years of mortal happiness that he gets isn't much, but it's far more than the suicidal kid we met at the start of this story ever could have hoped for. Platinum End makes a thorough case that persevering and clinging to life against the odds is the only way that any of us ever find happiness, save for a lucky few who are born into it and don't even appreciate it till they lose it, and that it's worth fighting for that possibility even in the face of the greater inevitability that one day it'll all just end, likely without any fanfare or explanation. In fact, it is that very unpredictable certainty that makes those fleeting moments of joy as precious as they are. Even as it makes that case, though, it acknowledges how uncompelling that reasoning would be to the scores of people around the world who've spent their entire lives on the losing end of a competition they never signed up for and don't have the tools to play properly. Telling people to cheer up and look on the bright side will never solve this problem. God's not going to do it for us, and if we don't solve it ourselves, which we probably won't considering how we act, sooner or later the death drive will consume us all. For the death drive, this platinum ending posits, is not just a quirk of human psychology, but the animating force behind all sapient life in the universe. Literally the only reason we exist, according to this story's cosmology, is to help our unknowable creators find a way to stop existing now that their even more unknowable creators are gone. Because the prospect of closure is the only thing that can ever make their tedious eons of life bearable and give it a semblance of meaning. You a fan of cosmic horror? Try some cosmic depression. This ending is far from perfect, but
Next to Death Notes, and after the rest of this show, it's like watching a dude take a Homer Simpson tumble all the way down a cliff, then right at the end he does a Willy Wonka roll into a slightly shaky gymnast dismount. It doesn't make what came before any less painful to watch, but it does at least reframe it as a little more than pointless blind idiocy. In fact, if you pull back and look at the whole mess as a whole, it's almost uncanny how close it comes to being the exact inverse of Death Note. There, a delicately tuned orchestra of human ambition and folly lost its antagonist conductor at the top of the third act and broke down into a cacophonous clusterfuck of contrived idiocy. Here, a cacophonous clusterfuck of contrived idiocy kills off its incompetent villain maestro at the start of the third act and comes together for a single, brief, but brilliant moment into a beautifully poignant, thought-provoking, and unnerving piece of art. A platinum end, if you will, that most people
Oh
don't
my
appreciate because the rest of it sucks so hard. So if all that was intentional and this is your Moriarty-esque subversive masterstroke where everything we thought we knew gets turned on its head, I'm sorry, Oba, but I don't think most people will notice or care, and that's fair. Because none of this magically makes the rest of it worth sitting through. Some beer and some buddies might, but that's an entirely separate equation. In aggregate, the show's basically one colossal mistake, but it's the kind of mistake that only people with an abundance of talent and a few genuinely great ideas, just enough to be overconfident about all their bad ones, could make. The kind of mistake you can learn a lot from and write a way too long video essay about. Kind of a beautiful mistake, from the right angle, after it's had some work done, when it's not flashing its horse teeth. And that might just be my favorite kind of mistake. No, I definitely prefer the messy, loud kind. Close second, though. Real quick before I go, speaking of mistakes, if you want to know why a certain upcoming TV anime adaptation is going to be a huge one, you should check out Yazzy's new video on a certain manga about a dog lover that is definitely not for dog lovers. It's one of her funniest videos yet, and low-key, it's probably going to be a prequel to an upcoming hottest trash of the season. I'm Jeff Thu, Talk No Jutsu Master, signing out from deep inside my own asshole.
Jesus fucking Christ. Oh, God. I should probably get going to bed. Enjoy my love. I do still have work tomorrow, even though it's fucking Christmas. I'm the only one of my colleagues who doesn't get the day off. Or today, for that matter. I know there are other people working on the base. It's just not the people I specifically work with. Alright, I'm going to call that there. I will see